Jason stood at the conference table, dressed in a sharp suit. Todd and Brandon stared in disbelief. Months ago, they mocked him as just a delivery guy. But now, Jason held the power to decide their future. What happened next would shock them all. But let's start from the beginning. Jason Carter had been working as a delivery guy for nearly 5 years, but it wasn't where he was supposed to be. He had a business degree from a respected university, graduated near the top of his class, and had dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. But after countless interviews, rejection emails, and vague explanations about not being the right fit, he found himself stuck delivering packages for Wilkins Enterprises, a company that seemed to treat him more like furniture than a person. It was the same routine every day. Jason would walk into the building carrying heavy packages while the office workers barely acknowledged him, unless it was to criticize him. Todd and Brandon, two young, entitled employees, were the worst of them all. "Hey, delivery boy," Todd smirked as Jason walked through the glass doors with a large box. "Try not to scratch the floor this time." Brandon chuckled from his desk. "Yeah, wouldn't want to give him too much responsibility." Jason forced a tight smile and kept moving. He'd learned to swallow his pride over the years. Speaking up would only give them more ammunition. But inside, his stomach was burning with anger. He knew exactly why they treated him this way. Jason was black, and in their eyes, that meant he didn't belong. One afternoon, as Jason was delivering a package to the executive floor, he overheard a conversation near the break room. Todd and Brandon were talking loudly, not even bothering to lower their voices. "Can you believe they let him in here?" Todd scoffed. "Yeah," Brandon laughed. "Probably stole that delivery uniform." Jason froze mid-step. His fingers curled tightly around the package he was holding. His heart was racing, but he forced himself to stay calm. He took a deep breath, dropped off the package, and walked away without saying a word. That night, Jason sat alone in his small apartment, replaying the scene over and over in his head. The humiliation, the anger, the injustice of it all. He knew he deserved more than this. He knew he was smarter, more capable than half the people sitting in that office. So why was he stuck being treated like he was invisible? Jason stared at his laptop, his business proposal sitting unfinished on the screen. He had been working on it for months, a plan that could save Wilkins Enterprises millions. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for an opportunity. Maybe it was time to create one himself. Jason kept his head down and did his job, but the resentment inside him was growing. Every day at Wilkins Enterprises felt like a new test of patience. Todd and Brandon never missed a chance to remind him of his place. And it wasn't just the mocking. It was the subtle, constant dismissiveness that grated on him the most. "Careful with that package," Todd sneered one afternoon as Jason placed a box on the front desk. "Wouldn't want you to pull a muscle or anything." Brandon chuckled. "Nah, he's probably used to heavy lifting. Isn't that what delivery guys are for?" Jason's jaw tightened. He took a breath and walked away without responding. But his hands were trembling as he left the room. He wasn't sure how much longer he could take it. The breaking point came during an afternoon delivery to the executive floor. Jason stepped into the conference room carrying a large box. Todd and Brandon were seated at the table with Mr. Wilkins, the CEO. Todd smirked. "Just leave it on the table, if you can figure out where that is." Jason's eyes narrowed, but he stayed calm. He placed the package down carefully and turned to leave, but then he heard something that made him stop cold. "We're still looking for a new VP of operations," Mr. Wilkins was saying. "None of the candidates have the strategic thinking we need." Todd's voice was casual, almost lazy. "Just hire someone that looks the part. Someone dependable." Jason's stomach twisted. He knew exactly what Todd meant. Someone white. someone who fit their perfect corporate image. Jason lingered outside the room for a moment longer, listening. "The supply chain numbers are a mess," Mr. Wilkins said. "We need someone with a real head for logistics." Todd chuckled. "Well, that rules out most of the people walking through those doors." Brandon laughed. "Yeah, especially the delivery guy." Jason felt like he'd been punched in the gut. His chest tightened as he walked toward the elevator. All those years of work, all that education, reduced to a joke. His fists clenched. He felt a heat rising in his chest, anger mixed with humiliation. That night, Jason sat in his apartment, his laptop open in front of him. His business proposal sat there, untouched. He'd been working on it for months, a detailed plan to fix the company's supply chain and increase profits by over 20%. He had all the answers they were looking for, and they had laughed at him. Jason's hands hovered over the keyboard. His eyes narrowed. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for their approval. Jason sat in his apartment that night, staring at his laptop. His business proposal was open on the screen, a detailed, carefully crafted plan to overhaul Wilkins Enterprises' supply chain and increase profits by over 20%. He had been working on it for months, pouring in his knowledge and experience. He knew it was exactly what the company needed. He also knew that no one in that office would ever take it seriously if he walked in as just the delivery guy. But why should that stop him? Todd and Brandon had underestimated him for years. They saw him as nothing more than the guy who carried boxes. But Jason was done being invisible. If they wouldn't give him a seat at the table, he would take it himself. The next morning, Jason put on his best suit, one he hadn't worn since his last failed job interview. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. His reflection stared back at him, calm and focused. No more waiting. No more hoping someone else would see his worth. He walked into Wilkins Enterprises with his head high. The receptionist at the front desk blinked in surprise. "Mr. Carter?" she said uncertainly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Jason said calmly. "But Mr. Wilkins will want to hear what I have to say." The receptionist hesitated. "I'm not sure that's—" Jason smiled. "Trust me." He walked straight toward the conference room where Mr. Wilkins was seated with Todd and Brandon. Their eyes widened when Jason stepped through the door, holding a leather binder with his proposal inside. "Jason?" Todd's mouth curled into a smirk. "What are you doing here?" Jason didn't even look at him. "Mr. Wilkins, I have a business proposal that will save this company millions. If you give me 5 minutes, I'll show you how." Todd scoffed. "Seriously? A business proposal? From him?" Jason ignored him. He walked to the head of the table and opened the binder. "I've identified inefficiencies in the supply chain," Jason said, his voice steady. "By restructuring vendor contracts and streamlining the delivery process, we can cut costs by over 20% in the next fiscal quarter." Todd rolled his eyes. "Come on, Mr. Wilkins. We're really listening to the delivery guy now?" Jason turned toward him, his eyes hard. "Do you know how much your supply chain overspending is costing this company annually?" Todd opened his mouth, but Jason cut him off. "Over $3 million. Jason slid a detailed chart across the table. "And this plan fixes it." Mr. Wilkins leaned forward, studying the data. "This is impressive." Jason met his eyes. "Because I know this business better than anyone in this room." Todd's smirk vanished. Brandon's face paled. Jason could feel the power shifting. Mr. Wilkins sat back in his chair. "Mr. Carter, why haven't you applied for a position here before?" Jason's mouth curled into a sharp smile. "I guess I never felt welcome." Todd's face turned red. For the first time, he had nothing to say. Jason stood tall. He had just turned the tables, and he wasn't done yet. 3 months later, Jason walked into Wilkins Enterprises, but this time he wasn't wearing a delivery uniform. He was in a tailored suit, holding a leather briefcase. Todd and Brandon were standing near the elevator, looking shocked. "Good morning, gentlemen," Jason said coolly. Todd stammered. "What are you?" Jason smiled. "I'm your new vice president of operations." Todd's mouth dropped open. Brandon turned pale. Jason stepped into the elevator, and just before the doors closed, he added, "And by the way, delivery guys, treat them with respect. You never know where they'll end up." The elevator doors slid shut. Jason smiled. Justice, at last.